Hi friends, thank you so much for connecting with me. Hope that you've had a good week. So today we are continuing our series, our 6-week series on the 6 culture statements for Reunion, the 6 things that really describe and define who we are as a community of faith. And so today, I want to talk about the 5th culture statement, and that says, pioneers, a culture of adventure and innovation. We openly consider and pursue creative new ideas that contribute to our shared sense of mission. I really, really love that. Can I read it again? A culture of adventure and innovation. You're going to hear those words come up again. We openly consider and pursue creative new ideas that contribute to what? Contribute to our shared mission. Can I tell you that when Kathy and I first came to BIC 8 years ago, it was this desire, this was very, very attractive to us, this desire to try new things, to help people discover how beautiful and amazing Jesus is and how beautiful and amazing a life-changing relationship with Jesus is, right? And that was very evident in the early days, of when we were talking about coming to High Z Hill. And so we have been on a journey, haven't we? For those of you who have been with us, for more than 8 years, we've been on quite a journey over these 8 years. First of all, deciding to transition the entire church to start a new church and become Reunion. And now we stand on the edge of another great adventure. We have some significant decisions to make in the next year or so in terms of what our new facility will be, where we want to be, what kind of facility we want it to be, how we're going to use it, for our mission of serving the community. We are standing, friends, on the edge of really significant and exciting and fun days, innovative days, adventure, innovation, that kind of thing. And so today, when I knew that we were going to talk about this 5th culture statement of adventure and innovation, pioneers, I was thinking about which Bible character I wanted to focus on. And there were so many that I could have focused on that really embraced the adventure, that really embraced this pioneer spirit. I could have easily talked about Noah, who, God says to Noah, I want you to build a boat. And Noah goes what's a boat, and I want you to make it like this huge. And Noah could be like, what are you talking about? The sense of adventure for Noah was off the charts. I could have talked about Abraham, who, I think it's in Romans, does it say that Abraham followed God not knowing where he was going? Talk about a sense of adventure and pioneer kind of thing. I could have talked about Paul the Apostle, who really made it his mission to preach Jesus in places that did not know about Jesus, right? Paul was a real trailblazer. There are so many different people in the Bible that I could have chosen to talk about. But I thought that maybe a good person to talk about would be Nehemiah. So Nehemiah, built the walls of Jerusalem. The walls that still stand today were built by Nehemiah. And so because of the relationship between Nehemiah building the walls and us making decisions about a physical, facility, I thought there might be some things that we can learn there. Okay, before I get to reading Nehemiah's story, let me give a bit of background and then we'll read parts of the story. Okay, so in 586 BC, the Assyrian Empire ruled the world. They ruled the Middle East, kind of the settled world at that point. And then the Assyrian Empire, 586, they conquered Israel, they conquered Jerusalem, and they completely trashed the place. They tore down the walls of the city, they tore down the temple, they stole all the stuff that was in the temple. They completely trashed the place, and they took all of the exiles out of Israel, out of Jerusalem, and left it a desolate wasteland, right? And then about 140-ish years later, there had been a group of what's called a remnant of Israel, and they returned to Jerusalem, and they rebuilt the temple under Ezra. And so you have this group of people. They've returned. They've rebuilt the temple. But they're still feeling very vulnerable, very exposed, and morale is quite low because they have no defense. The city of Jerusalem has no walls, or at least major portions of the wall have been torn down. And so they're feeling pretty demoralized, and they're feeling very vulnerable to attacks of the enemy, right? And so this is where we pick up the story of Nehemiah. Nehemiah chapter 1 says, Hanani, one of my brothers, came to visit me with some other men who had just arrived from Judah. Oh, I should say, kind of just take the words off the screen there. I should say that Nehemiah, at this point, the Persian Empire that's centered in modern-day Iran, the Persian Empire is ruling the Middle East, they're ruling kind of the world. And they're centered in, like I said, Iran, and Nehemiah is living in the palace of the king, which is kind of in modern day in southern Iran, and it's about a little over 2,000 kilometers away from Jerusalem, right? So Nehemiah is removed, and of course communication isn't the same as it is today. Nehemiah is 2,000 kilometers removed from Jerusalem, and his friends come and visit. And they had just been to Jerusalem, as we just read here. Hananiah, one of my brothers, came to visit me with some other men who had just arrived from Judah and from Jerusalem. I asked them about the Jews who had returned there from captivity and about how things were going in Jerusalem. These are the people who returned to rebuild the temple under Ezra. They said to me, things are not going well. For those who return to the province of Judah to rebuild the temple, they're in great trouble and disgrace. The wall of Jerusalem has been torn down, the gates have been destroyed by fire. And look at verse 4. When I heard this, I sat down and wept. In fact, for days I mourned and fasted and prayed to the God of heaven. Okay, let me just pause there for a second. And I want to make a couple of observations, 4 to be exact, kind of 3, but kind of 4. A couple observations. First of all, the sense of mission that Nehemiah felt and embraced. You know, there's one. Remember when I said that I could have chosen to talk about Paul or Noah, or like there are a bunch of biblical characters that I could have chosen to talk about that really embraced this sense of adventure. And there's one thing that I think summarizes or characterizes, describes all of those biblical characters. All of those biblical characters were not like adrenaline junkies. They didn't embrace this crazy new thing just for the sake of doing some crazy new thing, right? Nehemiah didn't just wake up one day and say, oh, wouldn't it be cool if we rebuilt no, they didn't embrace just for the sake of it. They embraced the adventure because they had a very, very clear sense that they were following God, and they were following God in what they felt He was calling them to do. In other words, they embraced the mission. And when they embraced the mission, they felt like they were on mission together with God and moving together with God to do, to do what God was leading them to do. And friends, this is really significant for us. As we move forward to acquire some kind of facility, and what that will be, where it will be, how we'll use it, all of that. We're not just doing this just for the sake of doing this. We're doing it because we feel like God is leading us to do that, right? But it's also very, very important for us to not just run off and do what we want to do. Like every step of the way, we need to be praying, friends. All of us need to be praying and asking God to please lead us, show us the way, make it clear to us, and provide for us along the way, right? So always at the center of everything that we've done, we've had our mission to serve our community, right? To serve our community spiritually by pointing people to Jesus, and also to serve our community in practical ways, right? So mission is the first thing that Nehemiah was compelled to do something. It says that he, when I heard this, I sat down and wept. In fact, for days I mourned and fasted and prayed to the God of heaven. Nehemiah was compelled to do something, and he was driven by this sense of mission to help the Jewish remnant that he heard about that were in trouble. Okay, so that's the first thing, mission. The second thing, maybe the key word that I would use is obstacles. It doesn't take very long in the story. In fact, chapter 2 of Nehemiah, where obstacles start to present themselves, right? In chapter 2, it says Sanballat and Tobiah, they're these two dudes. I won't bother describing who they were and where they came from, but these two people, Sanballat and Tobiah, were very displeased that someone had come to help the people of Israel. And then in chapter 4, it says Sanballat was very angry when he learned that we were rebuilding the wall. He flew into a rage and mocked the Jews, saying in front of his friends and the Samaritan army officers, "What does this bunch of poor, feeble Jews think they're doing?" Right? And then verse 11, our enemies were saying, before they know what's happening, they were threatening physical harm. Before they know what's happening, we will swoop down on them and kill them at the end of their work, right? And friends, here's the thing that I think we can learn from this, that anytime you we step out to do anything of a spiritual nature or physical, anytime you step out to embark on a grand adventure, there are going to be obstacles, right? And maybe it might be something that doesn't go as planned. Some external problem arises, or it might be a person who kind of comes and tries to throw a wrench in the gears. But anytime anybody, I'm not just talking about spiritual following God kind of here. Anytime anybody steps out on a grand adventure to innovate, and there are going to be problems, and there will be a moment, kind of like what I call like a gut check moment, where it's like, oh, I didn't think about that. And in that moment when you think, oh, wait a minute, this might not be successful. And so then in those moments, then you start to question yourself, right? And you say, like in our case, did we really hear from God? Is God really in this? And, and what happens if it doesn't work? And there are all these questions that come up for us, right? And that's when we go back to the simple question, God, are you in this? And are you actually leading us to do this, whatever it might be, right? So friends, actually the truth is that in this whole process, that really we haven't had any real significant obstacles. This whole process has really gone quite smoothly. And I think that's largely a result of following what we feel God is leading us to do. But it doesn't mean that, the acquisition. No, I mean, there have been things, right? Like the timing of selling the Heisey Hill property has been much slower than we thought. In the early days back in Heisey Hill, there were some people that disagreed, with what we were doing, and that's fine. Everybody's entitled to their opinion. So it hasn't been smooth as glass. There have been, delays with government and things like that. But, really, it's gone smoothly, right? But what I wanted to say is that as we go forward, if or when we hit obstacles or slowdowns in terms of selling the Heisey Hill property, purchasing something new, or purchasing or leasing, whatever we decide, and, moving forward. If or when we find obstacles, don't be surprised, because obstacles are the norm, right? And Nehemiah certainly discovered that obstacles happen, when you try to do something. But here's my third thought, and this is very, very significant, and I kind of already alluded to it. The key word or words here is confidence and dependence. Confidence and dependence. Nehemiah, I'm sure, had many questions, questioning himself, questioning God, questioning the situation, many questions. But in those moments, how did Nehemiah respond? Nehemiah chapter 2, verse 19. When Sanballat, Tobiah, and Geshem the Arab heard of our plans, they scoffed contemptuously. I love that word. They scoffed contemptuously. What are you doing? Are you rebelling against the king? They asked. And look at verse 20. I replied, the God of heaven will help us succeed. The God of heaven will help us succeed. And this goes back to the very first thing. Is God in this? Are we following God in his mission? And if we can answer yes to the best of our knowledge, to the best of our ability to kind of understand and follow, if we feel like we're following God, then we can say, like Nehemiah with confidence, the God of heaven will help us succeed. And then really quickly, the result in Nehemiah 6 says that the wall was finished just 52 days after we had begun. When our enemy and the surrounding nations heard about it, they were frightened and humiliated. They realized, listen to this, they realized this work had been done with the help of our God. And friends, 2 years, 3 years, 5 years down the road, when we're settled in our new space, and when it's really giving us a base for serving our community in many different ways, we'll be able to look back and with Nehemiah be able to say that this work has been done with the help of God. Okay? I think if I could just summarize, and I need to wrap up, I could just summarize that something I said earlier, that all of the biblical characters that stepped out with a sense of adventure and innovation, like our culture statement, they were not just adrenaline junkies. They were mission oriented. They had a clear sense that they were following God in what he was calling them to do and fulfilling their mission, right? And they depended on God for their success, right? Just like we depend on God for success just in general in our lives or in our community of faith at Reunion. Okay, so my time is up, gone a little bit long today, and need to wrap up. So hope that we see you on Sunday, and I hope you have a fantastic day.